Hello, I'm Kerr. Welcome to my art studio. Sometimes there are little tips and techniques to do with watercolour painting that nobody tells you about. So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips and techniques that hopefully will make your life easier. So, are you ready? If you've got lots of old tubes of watercolour paint and you don't really know what to do with them, let me give you an idea. Go and buy yourself some of those little containers that you make ice blocks in. Now I managed to find some that had lids on them, which I've never actually seen before. So I'll take those lids off. Now what I did was I took all my old tubes of paint and I divided them up into warm colours and cool colours, and I took all my warm reds and I squeezed them into there. I took all my cool reds and I squeezed them into there, warm yellows, cool yellows, and so on. And then I use these paints if I'm doing something like a background or some experimental watercolour where you're just playing around with colours, because it's quite exciting. When you're using a colour, because you've squeezed different paints into it, all of a sudden it can change its tone or its shade, and it's really quite exciting. So that's a way that you can really make use of all those old paints rather than throwing them away. When you have tubes of paint where the tops have got stuck and you're not quite sure how to get that top off without spoiling the paint tube, let me show you what I do. Go and hold it under a hot tap. Yes, a hot tap. It won't do it any harm. Run it under the hot tap for about half a minute, and then take a tissue or a cloth, and you'll find you will be able to unscrew it. And it's all gunged up around the top there. So then go back to the tap, take an old toothbrush, turn your tube of paint that way up so that the water doesn't run into it, and clean off the end of the tube. Really get it lovely and clean. Then take the lid and run that under the tap and clean that out as well, and then pop them back together. And you'll be absolutely fine. Providing you hold your tube that way, the water from the tap will not hurt your paint. If you've got a tube of paint where you're trying to get the last of the paint out and it's quite hard, I've got this little gadget. Now I don't know whether you can still buy these, but you can buy other ones which are very much like this, and I'll show you how it works. So if I want to get the last of the paint out of my tube, I've got little slots here, and I put my paint tube into there and I roll this along the paint tube, pressing quite hard, and then roll it back, and look, all the paint from there has moved up the tube. You would spend ages trying to do that or rolling it over, and this really does work extremely well. If you've got a longer paint tube, you could put that in there, or if you've got a very little paint tube, then you put it in this one up here, depending on the actual length of the tube. As I said, I don't know whether you can still get these, but you can certainly get ones where you twist a handle and that squeezes out all the paint. So I'll put a link to those down below. I'll try and find this one, but if it isn't still on the market, then the ones with the twisty handle are just as good. Sometimes you want to put people into your paintings, but you're not quite certain where to put them or how big to make them. Now I've got a little trick that I use all the time so that I know exactly where to put the figures in my painting. Let me show you what I do. Now, if you've got an old overhead transparency, those clear plastic transparencies, or you can use a clear folder that you buy for documents, cut it up and then draw with a Sharpie pencil some little people onto the plastic. All different sizes, maybe 2 people together or 2 children, big ones, small ones. So just with an ordinary Sharpie pen, and then if you take your painting, you can then put this on your painting and you can decide how big or how small you want your people to be. Maybe you want 2 people. Maybe you want little people away in the distance. Maybe you want a big person walking up the road. Here's another one. I could decide whether I want one person going through the gate, or maybe I want this person going through the door, or maybe I want 2 people going through the gate. You see how useful that can be, rather than putting your people into your painting, ruining your painting and think, oh, how am I going to get those off? So there you go. Travelling about with your paints can be quite cumbersome sometimes. You find you take far too much with you. So let me show you my little travel box and what I've actually got in it. This is my little travel box. I've got a big wash brush. I've got a little water brush, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. I've got my drawing pens, and I've got my little travel box of paints. And I've got a selection of travel brushes, different sizes. So I've got a pencil, I've got my drawing pens, I've got a water brush, I've got a selection of travel brushes, and here is my little travel box. This is the Winsor & Newton travel field box. Now, if I don't want to take my painting brushes with me, all I've got to use is my little water brush. If you haven't come across these before, you unscrew it, you pour in some water, screw it back on again, and then you can just use your water brush to paint with. How easy is that? But if you do want to take your travel brushes with you, then you've got a water pot and you've got a palette. As well as the little palettes that are stuck on the side here, I can use this as my palette. So all those things pack into that little tiny plastic box. I've got some little tips for you about masking tape and masking fluid. If you've got masking tape around your picture and you want to take your masking tape off, then a good little trick is to heat it just a little bit on a warm setting with a hairdryer, and then take your masking tape and make sure you pull it away from your painting. If you pull it towards your painting, the chances are you'll rip your paper. So always pull it away from your painting and you will have no problem whatsoever. If I want to use masking fluid on my painting, in order to put my masking fluid onto my paper, I use a very old paintbrush. Now what you must not do is dip your paintbrush directly into the masking fluid, because it's a rubbery solution and it will totally ruin your brush. Even though I'm using an old brush, it will still ruin it. So what I do is I take some washing up liquid and I put a little drop of washing up liquid onto my brush and I squeeze it in, and then I take a tissue and I just pull off the washing up liquid. Don't put it under the tap, just pull it off with a tissue, and then take your masking fluid, dip your brush in it and do whatever it is you want to do on your painting. And then straight away, and it must be straight away, take your brush to the tap, put put it under the tap and wash it off. Because you've got that little layer of washing up liquid on there, all the masking fluid will slide off very, very easily. But as I said before, do not use your good brushes. Removing paint from your watercolour painting can be done in many ways. Let me show you two of the ways that I often use. If you wanted to take out a straight line in your painting and make it almost back to the white paper, you take two pieces of card and you put them exactly where you want the line to be, and then with a brush you make that wet, and you can also take a sponge, make that wet as well, and wipe it out with a sponge. Obviously it'll depend on whether you've got staining paint or non-staining paint as to whether you go right back to white paper, but that's a lovely way of getting a straight line if you want to remove that from your painting. Now sometimes if you're painting a seascape and you're painting waves breaking up against rocks, a very neat little trick of doing spray is to get a piece of sandpaper and find a dark area of your painting, either the rocks themselves or maybe the dark sky behind the rock, and then you rub it with sandpaper. Now I'm going to turn off the sound here because the noise of sandpaper rubbing on here is not very nice, so I won't actually speak while I'm doing this. Right, I've turned the sound back on again now. Can you see the effect that you get? And depending on how fine or coarse the sandpaper is, you can rub that right back to white paper and even begin to take off some of the bits of white paper if you want to. So that's a lovely, lovely way of doing spray coming up from rocks. Also, if you were doing a seascape and you want to put some little wind lines or little lines across the water, and as we know, you can't put a light colour watercolour on top of a dark colour watercolour, so this is an oil pastel, a white oil pastel, so you can use that for putting lines anywhere that you want onto your water. You've bought a brand new palette and you don't quite know where to put the different colours in your palette. Let me give you a little trick on how to sort that out. Get yourself a piece of watercolour paper, chop it up into little bits and put a little sample of each of your paints onto the paper and write the name next to it. And then take your palette. Obviously you'd have an empty palette. Mine's already been filled. And then you can put these wherever you think you would like them to be in your palette. And you can just move them around, rearrange them until you're happy with the arrangement. If you've got a spare compartment, don't leave it on the end. If you leave it between two colours, maybe you've left it between the reds and the yellows, then if you have a new red or a new yellow to put in your box, you can pop it into the spare one. But if it's stuck on the end, it's always going to be down there next to, whatever, and it won't be relevant as to where that paint is. So any spaces you have, dot your spaces around in the palette. I spent ages organising my palette, moving things around like this, and it really worked. If you would like more videos like this, then consider clicking that subscribe button and the little bell icon, because that will notify you when I upload another video. If you've enjoyed this one, then give it a thumbs up, because giving it a thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to more people, and that helps to grow my channel so I can make more videos for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember everybody, There is an artist in everyone. Goodbye for now.